I hope she can even pronounce Brunello. That was the first thing he said, loud enough for his table to chuckle, but just quiet enough to pretend it wasn't meant to offend. But it did. Every syllable sliced through the soft jazz playing in the background. Every syllable said one thing loud and clear: you don't belong here. Zara Holloway tightened her grip on the notepad she always carried. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark apron, she stood tall, taller than most expected. Her skin glowed under the warm lighting, her natural curls tucked neatly beneath a headband. She was young, radiant, and sharp, everything the man in the $5,000 suit didn't expect. She looked him in the eye and, with the grace of a practiced violinist, replied in flawless Italian, "Vuole il Brunello di Montalcino del 97, vero?" Silence. The air around table 7 turned to ice. His smirk collapsed. One of the other guests even dropped his fork. That moment, that split second, was when the power shifted. But this isn't just a story about wine. It's about something deeper. Something we at Hidden Worth believe must be told. A black story that's been lived too often and voiced too little. You're about to see what happens when grace meets ignorance, when prejudice meets poise, when a billionaire walks in thinking he owns the room and leaves realizing he never understood it. Zara's story isn't just hers. It belongs to every woman who's ever been overlooked, every employee who's ever been underestimated, every dreamer who's had to smile through disrespect just to survive one more shift. If this already hit you, don't scroll. This isn't drama, it's reality. It's why we do what we do on Hidden Worth, uncovering truth where others see none. Because behind every quiet face is a storm waiting to speak. So stay, watch till the end. And next time you raise a glass, remember, the one serving it might just speak your language better than you ever could. Zara Holloway wasn't supposed to be a waitress. Not by society's standards, not by her family's hopes, and definitely not by her own dreams. But here she was, working nights at Rosetta's, one of Manhattan's elite Italian restaurants, where the cheapest wine on the menu costs more than her monthly groceries. Where linen napkins are folded like origami and the scent of truffle oil lingers in the air like perfume. Every evening, she tied her apron, checked her lipstick, and stepped into a world where people like her, young, black, ambitious, were expected to serve, not shine. But Zara wasn't just anyone. She was 28, with a degree in Italian linguistics from Georgetown. She graduated top of her class. She spent a summer in Florence, mastering both the language and the art of pairing wines with dishes most Americans couldn't pronounce. She once gave a talk at a wine symposium attended by sommeliers twice her age, but none of that came up when customers looked at her. To them, she was just the waitress. And still she smiled. Because this job was never her destination, it was her launch pad. She had a vision, a modern Italian soul food fusion bistro, a place where her roots and her passions could finally meet. She kept a sketch of the floor plan in her purse. She worked extra shifts to build her savings. She studied wine pairings on her break. Every glass she poured, every table she cleared, it wasn't just labor. It was training. Outside of work, Zara lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens. She rode the F train daily, earbuds in, listening to Italian podcasts or voice notes of herself practicing food descriptions. Her friends joked that she dreamt in Italian. Maybe they were right. But no amount of talent or work ethic made her immune to bias. Some nights, patrons refused to look her in the eye. Others spoke slower, louder, like she wouldn't understand them. A few asked for someone more familiar with the menu code, for someone whiter, older, male. She was used to it, not numb, but conditioned, like a dancer who performs on a cracked stage. And yet, she kept showing up. Because she believed that one day, one perfect moment, someone would stop seeing her uniform and start seeing her worth. That moment, it turns out, had just begun. Charles Aldridge wasn't used to being corrected, let alone in public, and definitely not by someone he had just dismissed. After the shock of Zara's Italian reply settled, he leaned back in his chair, swirling his water glass like it held answers. The smirk he wore earlier was gone, replaced by a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a challenge more than a compliment. "Where'd you learn to talk like that?" Zara didn't flinch. Florence, I studied there for a semester, she answered calmly, pen still poised on her notepad. I also majored in Italian linguistics. She could feel the table watching. The two women beside Charles looked at each other, eyebrows raised. One of them, dressed in a sleeveless navy dress, glanced at Zara with something that almost resembled respect. But Charles wasn't done. Oh, so you're fluent, he said, dragging the word out like it tasted bad. How do you say, service with a smile, in Italian? The question wasn't sincere. It wasn't about curiosity. It was a jab. Zara smiled anyway, though this time it didn't reach her eyes. Servizio con un sorriso, she replied, her tone light but precise. Then she turned slightly, offering the same practiced smile to the rest of the table. Would anyone else like to hear the specials tonight? Charles didn't respond. He simply leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table like a man recalibrating his strategy. Zara knew the type. Power wasn't something they held, it was something they needed to feel. And when it slipped, even a little, they tried to take it back. As she listed the evening's entrees, her voice steady and warm, she could see him studying her. Not listening. Studying. Like she was a riddle that didn't fit his world. And in a way, she didn't. She was supposed to be invisible. Just another name on the tip slip. Another body blending into the background of luxury. But Zara had broken the script. She had spoken in a language he didn't expect, both literally and symbolically. And that unnerved him. When she left their table to grab the wine, she could still feel his gaze on her back, not with curiosity, but calculation. Like he had to figure out whether to be threatened or intrigued. But she didn't care. Zara had no time for games. She had a floor to run, tips to earn, and a dream to fund. Let him sit with his ego. She had tables to serve and a fire that wouldn't be dimmed. It didn't take long for the tension at table 7 to bubble back to the surface. Zara had just finished pouring the wine, a vintage Brunello, that cost more than most people's rent. Her hands were steady, her posture flawless. But beneath that calm exterior, she felt it. The shift in the room. The way Charles's energy had turned cold and calculating. And the way his companions, especially the man to his left, started acting bolder. His name was Dean, early 50s, salt and pepper hair, laugh too loud, watch too big. He was the kind of man who had never been told to lower his voice. And tonight, he'd had just enough wine to think he was funny. As Zara placed the last glass on the table, Dean leaned toward Charles and said, just loud enough for everyone, including her, to hear. Gotta say, Chuck, I didn't know the help came with subtitles these days. A beat of silence. Then laughter. From Charles, from two others. Zara didn't move. She didn't blink. She stood there for half a second longer than usual, her smile fading just slightly, just enough for anyone paying attention to see it crack. But no one was paying attention to her. Dean kept going. I mean, what's next? A sommelier with a side of soul food? He chuckled, elbowing Charles, who raised his glass with a smirk. Zara turned away, slowly, gracefully, but inside, something burned. She walked back toward the bar, each step controlled, her breath shallow. Behind her, the laughter faded, replaced by the clink of silverware and casual indifference. Another joke. Another night. Another woman of color told she didn't belong, not with words, but with tone, with smirks, with silence from people who should have spoken up. She'd heard worse. She'd endured worse. But tonight felt different. Tonight it wasn't just a slight, it was an ambush. And the worst part? It came wrapped in tailored suits and expensive smiles. The kind that leave no bruise, just a bitter aftertaste. At the service station, Zara wiped her hands on a towel and took a deep breath, not to calm down but to lock the emotion away. She couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Because the night was far from over. And they hadn't seen the last of her. The first compliment came unexpectedly and from the last person Zara thought would notice. Her name was Elaine, late 42nd, quiet confidence in her voice, dressed in a sharp cream blazer with pearls that didn't try too hard. She hadn't laughed at Dean's joke. In fact, she hadn't laughed much at all since the group sat down. She'd watched Zara not with judgment, but curiosity, like she was trying to read a language she almost understood. When Zara returned to refill their water glasses, Elaine gently tapped her menu. "Excuse me," she said. "What would you recommend with the duck confit tonight? I was thinking red, but not too bold." Zara paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the question came with genuine interest, real respect. "I'd suggest a Barbera d'Asti," Zara said, her voice soft, assured. "It's Italian, from Piedmont. Light enough not to overpower the duck, but still holds its own with the richness. You'll get notes of cherry, a little spice, and just the right acidity to balance the fat." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "You've tried it?" Zara smiled. "It's one of my favorites." That was all it took. Elaine set her menu down. "Then bring me whatever vintage you like." Charles looked up, brows slightly furrowed. "You trust her taste that much?" Elaine didn't blink. "I trust anyone who knows what they're talking about." There was a pause at the table, small, but meaningful. The dynamic shifted. Even Dean cleared his throat and looked away. Zara excused herself and walked back to the bar, her chest a little lighter. It wasn't praise she was after. It was validation, the kind that doesn't scream or grandstand, but simply says, "I see you." Moments later, she returned with the bottle, expertly uncorked it, and poured a small taste for Elaine. The woman sipped, closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Perfect. It was one word, but it rang louder than any insult that had come before. The rest of the table grew quieter after that, more measured, more aware. Zara noticed. Sometimes, respect doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes, it's tucked between subtle glances and carefully chosen words. But when it comes, especially after humiliation, it feels like a small victory in a long war. And for Zara, that moment reminded her she wasn't invisible. She was seen. And she was starting to be heard. In the kitchen, behind the hum of burners and the clatter of silverware, Executive Chef Marco stirred a pan of wild mushroom risotto. He'd been working at Rosetta's for over a decade, a proud Italian with sleeves rolled up, voice like gravel, and a sixth sense for drama in the dining room. He hadn't seen what happened at table 7, but he didn't need to. He knew Zara. Knew that look in her eyes when she returned from a table shaken but not broken. Quiet, composed, but her silence spoke volumes. "You good, Zara?" he asked, without looking up. "I'm fine," she answered, her voice steady. He didn't push, but as she turned to walk back out, he added, "You know, some of us still remember that speech you gave in Florence." She paused. That was 5 years ago. And it still echoes. Zara smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Out in the dining room, whispers began to float between servers. A new couple at the bar had overheard Elaine talking about Zara's wine suggestion. She said the waitress studied in Italy, one of them murmured. Moments later, another waiter approached the table, younger, new to Rosetta's, curious. "Hey," he whispered to Zara between tables, "did you really train at the Florence Wine Institute?" Zara nodded once. Summer residency, full scholarship. The waiter's eyes widened. "Damn, didn't know that. Most don't." Word began to spread, not in gossip, but admiration. The kind that changes how people look at you. In the kitchen, Marco couldn't hold back anymore. He strolled out, apron dusted in flour, and passed table 7 casually. He nodded toward Zara and addressed Charles directly. "You're in good hands," Marco said. "She's the only one in this building who once corrected a sommelier in Verona." Charles blinked. "She did what?" Marco chuckled. "Twice. Poor guy still flinches when he hears her name." With that, Marco disappeared back into the kitchen. The table fell into a rare silence. Zara didn't gloat. She simply topped off Elaine's glass and moved to the next table. But inside, something shifted. Not pride, not revenge, but something better. Validation. The kind no title, no insult, no billionaire ego could erase. For the first time that evening, Charles looked at Zara and saw more than a server. He saw a threat. He saw a woman who didn't just belong in the room, she might know more about it than he did. Charles Aldridge wasn't a man who took defeat quietly, not even in moments where defeat wasn't official. The compliments, the shift in energy, the tiny spotlight that had drifted from him to the young black woman in an apron, it gnawed at him. So when Zara returned to refill a water glass, Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it either. "Tell me something," he said, voice smooth. "What would you pair with a dry-aged ribeye, rare, no sauce?" Zara tilted her head, meeting his gaze calmly. "Depends on the preparation. But off the cuff? Probably a bold Nebbiolo or a Syrah, depending on the tannin balance you want." He nodded slowly, but the wheels were already turning. "What about a game bird?" he pressed. "Let's say pheasant, roasted, minimal seasoning." Zara smiled. "A light-bodied Pinot Noir, maybe a Côte de Beaune, enough earth to complement, but won't overpower the meat." Charles sat forward, hands clasped. "Impressive. Now let's make it interesting." He motioned to the server beside him and ordered a plate duck ravioli with black truffle butter and shaved parmesan, a dish not even listed on the menu that night, a quiet flex of power. "Choose the wine," he told Zara. "Something off the list, something you believe will elevate this dish, and if you get it wrong, I'll let Marco know we need someone better suited for fine dining." Zara raised an eyebrow. "And if I get it right?" Charles smirked. "Then maybe I owe you a bottle." The table leaned in. Even Dean paused mid-sip. This wasn't about wine anymore. Zara didn't hesitate. She walked to the wine cellar, eyes scanning the shelves like a composer choosing her next note. Within seconds, she found it a 2014 Barolo from the Canubi vineyard. Delicate enough for pasta, bold enough for truffle, a wine that knew how to hold presence without demanding it. She returned, opened it herself, and poured with care. No theatrics, just precision. When the ravioli arrived, Charles took a bite, then a sip. The change was instant. His brow lifted, his chewing slowed. He looked down at the glass, then back at Zara. No words. Just a quiet nod. Elaine whispered, "She won." And everyone at that table knew it. Not because she beat him, but because she never played his game. She just reminded him what it felt like to be taught something, by someone he underestimated. Just as the air began to settle around table 7, a new voice broke through the low hum of the restaurant. "Excuse me, Zara Holloway?" Zara turned. At a nearby table, seated across from a well-dressed couple, was a man in his early 60s, silver hair, clean navy suit, and glasses that seemed too stylish for someone his age. He looked stunned, the kind of surprise that reaches your chest before your face catches up. Zara blinked. "Yes?" The man smiled. "I thought so. I was at the International Wine Symposium in Florence, 2017. You gave a talk on cross-regional pairings, Old World versus New World. I still remember the part about Syrah versus Shiraz. For a moment, the clink of silverware and soft jazz seemed to fade. "Oh wow, Professor Langston?" Zara asked. He stood, reaching over to shake her hand. "That's me. And you? You were the rising star of that year. Your presentation blew the room away. You had sommeliers twice your age taking notes." Elaine watched the exchange, brows raised. Even Charles looked confused. Langston continued, "I've always wondered where you ended up. Didn't expect to find you working the floor." Zara smiled gently. "Life has detours. Well, I hope this one's temporary. You had one of the sharpest palates I've ever encountered. You made that panel in Florence look like amateurs." The room hadn't gone quiet, but the energy shifted. Again. Now it wasn't just Zara the server, Zara the wine whisperer, Zara the Italian speaker. She was now Zara, known and respected beyond these walls, someone with a reputation that predated this table, this challenge, this night. Charles sat still, trying to process. His world, where value came with power and titles, was cracking. Because here was a woman who held neither yet commanded more respect in 30 seconds than he had all evening. Langston smiled warmly. "If you're ever looking to get back into the wine world, education, consulting, research, I'd love to talk." He handed her a business card, nodded once, and returned to his seat. Zara tucked the card into her apron pocket, heartbeat steady, not out of shock but out of control, out of purpose. Because when the past reaches into your present to remind the world who you are, that's not luck. That's legacy. And in that moment, Zara knew something had changed. Not around her. Within her. Zara had faced plenty of subtle digs in her time. But this was different. After the wine pairing, after the quiet recognition, after the professor's unexpected endorsement, Charles should have stopped, should have at least accepted that the game was over. But ego doesn't bow easily. And for men like Charles Aldridge, silence often meant planning the next move, the kind that hits where people aren't looking. While Zara cleared the remaining plates, moving with grace between tables, Charles waved over the floor, manager discreet, hushed, fake concern painted on his face. "I don't want to make a scene," he said, in that hushed, performative tone privileged people use when they're about to do exactly that. "But, is there someone else who could take over our table?" The manager, Kyle, young and sharp, blinked. "Is there a problem with Zara?" Charles leaned in. "Look, I'm not questioning her intelligence. She's clearly articulate, but she's a bit too forward for this environment. Some of my guests feel uncomfortable." It was the kind of complaint designed to sound reasonable. But it wasn't. It was coded, controlled, cruel. Kyle hesitated. He'd seen it before, dressed up in polite language, cloaked in guest comfort. And he also knew Zara, knew her work ethic, her composure, her loyalty to the team. "She's one of our best," Kyle replied, his tone even. "If there's a specific concern, I'd be happy to address it, but we don't reassign servers unless there's been a clear issue." Charles didn't like that answer. "I know the owner," he added casually, like a closing argument. "I've invested in more restaurants than I can count." Kyle nodded once. "And I know the team that keeps this one running." Zara returned just in time to catch the final seconds of the exchange. She didn't need to ask. She saw it on Charles's face, smugness just barely cracking beneath frustration. She saw it in Kyle's stance, solid, firm, not backing down. "What's going on?" she asked, calm but direct. Kyle turned to her. "Nothing you need to worry about. You're doing a great job." Charles, flustered now, adjusted his cufflinks. "It's just a preference." Zara didn't flinch. "I've heard that word before," she said. "Usually when someone wants to excuse behavior they know they shouldn't be showing." That silence returned not the awkward kind, but the heavy, undeniable kind. This wasn't about comfort. This was about control. And Charles had officially lost his grip. Charles Aldridge had built a life on control, on walking into rooms and having people adjust themselves to fit his presence. But tonight, in this upscale Manhattan restaurant, the room had shifted and not in his favor. As Zara stood beside the table, steady and composed, the air had changed. It wasn't just about one man anymore. People were watching, not just his table, not just Kyle, the manager, but other guests, servers, even the bartenders had paused mid-pour. There's a tension you can feel in a room when someone finally says what no one else dares to, and it lingers. Elaine broke the silence first. "That was out of line, Charles," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the white noise. "You asked her to prove herself." "She did. Then you moved the goalpost." Charles looked stunned, not because of what she said, but because she dared to say it. Dean shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally sensing the heat that had been building. Then, from the other side of the room, a soft voice added, "That's the girl who gave the Florence keynote, right?" Zara turned slightly. It was Professor Langston. "She's not just qualified," he said. "She's exceptional." Kyle stepped forward, tone calm but final. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, "we have a code of conduct here, and while we respect our guests, we also stand by our staff. Zara hasn't just done her job, she's handled this situation with professionalism most people couldn't match." Charles scoffed. "Are you kicking me out?" Kyle didn't blink. "I'm asking you to respect the space you're in. But if that's not something you're comfortable with, I'm happy to print your check now." Zara said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was filled with something far louder dignity. Charles looked around the table. No allies, no smirks, just polite discomfort and dropped gazes. Even Dean had checked out of the conversation, swirling his glass like it held an escape plan. Without a word, Charles stood, pulled out a black Amex card, and handed it to Kyle. "Charge the full meal," he muttered. "No need to split." Kyle nodded, took the card, and walked away. Charles glanced at Zara one last time, but this time, the look wasn't defiant. It was uncertain. He left moments later, without fanfare. And as the door swung closed behind him, the room slowly exhaled. It wasn't justice by the book, but it was something close. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or headlines. It comes when a room full of strangers chooses decency over silence. And tonight, they chose Zara. After Charles left, the atmosphere inside Rosetta's felt lighter. Not cheerful, not yet, but lighter, like a fog had lifted. Zara didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Her victory hadn't been about making a scene. It was about surviving one, with her pride intact and her grace undiminished. She returned to the service station, refilled a water pitcher, and adjusted her apron like it was any other night. But it wasn't. Elaine waved her over. "Zara," she said, standing and placing a hand gently on her arm. "I want to apologize not just for what was said, but for not speaking up sooner." Zara gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you. It means more than you know." Before she could step away, another voice chimed in, this one softer, but with authority. "I've been looking for someone like you," said a woman seated a few tables over, elegant, sharp, mid-50s, with a leather notebook and an aura of confidence money couldn't buy. Zara paused, uncertain. "I'm sorry?" The woman extended a hand. "Nadine Whitaker. I run a small chain of boutique wine bars, mostly in the Midwest, but we're expanding. I've been scouting for someone with cultural fluency, someone who understands Italian wine, but more importantly, understands people." Zara raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't trying to recruit anyone tonight," Nadine continued. "But you showed leadership, calm under pressure, and a command of wine knowledge I don't see often, not even in sommeliers with 20 years of experience." Zara blinked, caught off guard for the first time that evening. "I'd love to talk," Nadine said, handing over a crisp business card. "Come by the office this week. Let's see if we can help each other grow." Zara stared at the card, fingers closing around it like it might vanish if she let go. "I thank you," she managed, words catching in her throat. Nadine smiled. "No rush. Just know this, not everyone saw tonight as an embarrassment. Some of us saw a star who's outgrown the ceiling she's standing under." As Nadine turned back to her table, Zara looked around the room. The people, the lights, the scent of rosemary and olive oil in the air. And suddenly, everything felt different. Not because the restaurant had changed, because she had. The insults no longer echoed. The fear no longer held her breath hostage. There was only the silence of a new possibility and the soft beat of her heart saying, "You're not stuck, you're just passing through." Zara folded the card and tucked it next to the floor plan sketch in her purse, the dream she thought might never leave that paper. Until now. There's a moment in life quiet, unannounced, when everything shifts. Not because something explodes, but because something within you wakes up. For Zara Holloway, that moment didn't come with applause. It didn't come when she served the perfect wine or silenced the most powerful man at the table. It came in the stillness when she realized she no longer needed to prove herself to people who refused to see her. And maybe that's the lesson. In a world that often demands that you earn your place, especially if you're a woman, if you're young, if your skin isn't what they expect, the most radical thing you can do is know your worth before anyone validates it. Zara didn't win that night because she spoke Italian. She won because she never let ignorance define her voice. She didn't retaliate. She didn't stoop. She didn't crumble. She stood. With grace. With history. With quiet power. Because sometimes, power isn't loud. It isn't rich. It doesn't walk in wearing a tailored suit. Sometimes, power is a waitress in a busy dining room holding a tray in one hand and a dream in the other. And if you've ever been in Zara's shoes, underestimated, overlooked, spoken over, let this story remind you. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't need permission to take up space. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for your brilliance. This world may not always offer you a seat at the table. But that's okay. You're here to build your own. So take the job if it funds your vision. Learn quietly. Endure gracefully. Let them laugh, doubt, dismiss. Then surprise them not with revenge, but with excellence. Because the best revenge is rising when they thought you'd break. And if this story moved you, if you saw a piece of yourself in Zara, then you're exactly who we tell stories for. At Hidden Worth, we believe there are 1,000 untold victories happening every day. Quiet wins, personal battles, hidden strength. So if you're still here, listening, feeling this, hit that subscribe button. Not for us, for you. Because your story matters. And we're here to remind you every voice has value. Even the ones they try not to hear. Especially those